the goal is to not be the smartest person in the room. You want to learn from everybody. It may not necessarily be exactly what you wanted to learn, but you can learn from people in multiple ways. You can learn more about them, what drives them, what their motivations are, what their thought process is. Don't romanticize the idea of being a founder if you're not willing to do the work, if you're not willing to compromise, to sacrifice.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of NEWFORUM, and we're always happy to bring you awesome creators, founders, and investors on our Web3 podcast. And on today's episode, I'm super happy to be with SIRSU, who is the founder of BLVKHVN. BLVKHVN is creating an emerging ecosystem for on-chain esports organizations, and I'm super happy to talk with SIRSU more about his project and also community, esports, gaming, and a bit about DAOs. Hi SIRSU, happy to have you on.
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I would love to know more about how did you found into the Web3 space and what got you so excited about gaming specifically?
The Web3 entry into the space had nothing to do with gaming at first. A really good friend of mine, his name is LateEffects on Twitter, and that's, I think, his moniker. He hit me up one day. I think we were having a conversation about general investing. I was like, dude, I just reopened my Coinbase account. I'm like doing dollar cost averaging investing on ETH. But I want to know, what can I do with it? And he was like, well, I'm selling my Instagram filters like on this website called Rarible. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yes, you can earn ETH like by creating art and selling art. And I'm like, dude, that's like revolution. That's amazing. So I dove in. This is summer 2020, mind you. This is like August. And he just kind of really threw me into the world. And at that point, I was so enthralled with it. I was like, I got to learn more. I started documenting it. I put up like a series on Instagram, I think at the end of the year, like how to be a crypto creator. Like I spent all like the rest, like the summer and the fall, just learning how to do all of this. And then by the time it hit wintertime, I was on Clubhouse and just kind of like sharing my experiences really. And that helped a good deal of people. And then right around, I think December 8th was trending upwards. Gas fees were incredibly expensive. And I wanted to figure out how I could help assuage that situation. And so again, same friend, he was like, dude, help me like pay for the gas fee for this piece. And when it sells, I'll give you a portion of the profit. I was like, dude, just take the money. It doesn't matter. He sends me some money on Cash App with another friend of mine. And we just decide to pay it forward. So we go on Twitter and we're like, yo, who wants to mint art? And then the folks at Zora, a really cool person who was formerly part of Foundation, named Samantha, Jacob from Zora, Mikhail from Zora, and then Jess from C Club and Carlos from Forefront. We all got together and built what we called the Mint Fund, which was a fund to just help artists mint NFTs for free. Zora gave us about 10 ETH, and then we had a bunch of artist donations, and we pushed a lot of artists through that, like early 2021. And that's what really kind of got me interested into DAOs. It's what got me sort of interested into kind of like the idea of giving back to community, building a very altruistic system. And at that point, prior to any of the NFT stuff during the beginning of the pandemic, me and my other homies, we were in a Twitch streaming group called BLVKHVN. And we built a following just by showing our creativity and having a really unique like viewpoint and creating content. And we wanted to find a way to get back to that. So I kind of put the two things together. I said, all the stuff I've been learning about crypto, we should be able to apply it within gaming. And then we wrote an article called Building a Decentralized Gaming Community in July of 2021. August, we hit a crowdfund. We raised $1 million in a day and we got to work. And that was sort of like how I got into the Web3 space. And then sort of just like even early on, like BLVKHVN, how we started.
Wow, I love that story. It seems really organic, and I feel like you sound like kind of like how I got into the space. It's like I was took by surprise, and it sounds like you got took by surprise as well by the potential of what can actually be happening. I'm wondering, like, what made you want to build a DAO, or what made you decide, okay, like I got this far with like NFTs, I really see the potential, but being a founder is a whole nother challenge. And what made you decide then to go on that journey?
Thankfully, I have to attribute this to my parents. They really instilled in me kind of very early on, like what it meant to be an entrepreneur, like what it meant to build a business, what it meant to kind of pursue your dreams as a founder. I looked to both of them. They were great examples. My mom ran a nutrition practice out in Florida, and then in a consultant firm, and my dad built a office supply and medical supply company out in Philadelphia. So I had really good examples of sort of like what it takes, and I could count on them as resources and as mentors to help me through my own process. So I wouldn't have been able to do it without them and the swath of people around me that were mentors and family friends. So I think I had the experience through them and the mental fortitude to kind of like apply myself in that sense. It was really just me walking through that door and just making that decision of saying, I believe that we can do something different and special. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of pain. But at the end of the day, when we see the road that we've laid and that other people can travel upon much easier than we did, then it was all worth it. So that's kind of like how I've like looked into it, and that's what's kind of kept me going, even though it's been incredibly challenging.
Knowing the why along the journey, I think, is important, and remembering that, and being part in the DAO now, and obviously you're also part of the Zora community and other projects. Like, what kind of challenges do these artists and people face within the DAO that you see on a daily basis that are challenges that you also face, maybe?
I think this is something that continues to be a recursive conversation, mainly because it's all about contribution, and it's about understanding the merit of work and understanding the value of work, the cost of labor. And so, for example, I could say like early DAOs, it was very hard to get people to rally around proposals, governance, and voting. I would say DAOs now, same issues, right? Challenges around voting, around proposals, around governance, around what seems fair versus what seems unfair, based upon like if you're an early person and you may have paid less or more, or you're a person that paid at the top and now is upset because the value has gone down because of market conditions or other things, and trying to like bring it back to core values in a sense. So it's very difficult when you've got like this financial layer that is very important and that has to be transparent and established, but also when you have that component kind of really front facing, the stakes and the way people weigh decisions is different because it's tied to potentially the ebb and flow of financial value. So for example, if you take a look at like what's happening with Nouns now, like I think Nouns is one of those really unique experiments that has created a new wave of multiplayer governance and multiplayer collection of funds and crowdfunding conversations and things of that nature to build something greater than yourself. It's like Gestalt theory or Gestalt principle, but just as a DAO, I think Nouns does like a really good job at kind of facilitating that. But again, like some of the same issues still persist where it's very challenging to get people actively participating in the pursuance of proliferating, your DAO. So whether that's Nouns, whether that's Blackhand, whether that's, Public Assembly or any other type of DAO, the idea of getting active contributors and then understanding the fundamental cost of the labor and the work to get it done is a challenge. The one thing I'll say too is like a really good friend of mine goes by Madam Cult Leader on Twitter. They said something very poignant where they talked about this idea that everyone in crypto or folks in crypto and even some in Web3 are thinking that because they provide money, they're the capitalists of sort of like this ecosystem. But if everybody's a capitalist, then nobody's a laborer. And so how do you move away from feeling like we're all capitalists and to we are all people that are contributing financially? Where does that labor become the greatest part of this value ecosystem rather than just the financialization and rather than just kind of like the contribution of a dollar? And I think that's the sort of inflection point that we're at right now, which is why DAOs are super unique, because I feel like we're close to unlocking maybe what that secret sauce is, but that's kind of like the incumbent challenge that we've been faced with.
Yeah, it's something I've experienced as well. It's like leadership and like kind of roles being like very fluid, and then also but tools like the DAO tools that you're using on an everyday basis is like it changes, or you're not really sure how to even get the proposal through. Do you guys have a token right now?
Yeah, so we have 2 tokens. So when we first started, when we did our crowdfund via Mirror, we had an ERC20 token called Hand. or HVND. At the time, we were working with some of one of the traditional DAO tools, and kind of like the idea of like if you have a tokenized ecosystem, then you have to have a tokenized model, and how do you do liquidity? How do you build liquidity? And a lot of that stuff was incredibly challenging, especially when you're trying to build something within esports. And esports, just real quick, especially for folks who are not necessarily aware of like that aspect of gaming culture, it's about really the sponsorship and the connection. It's not too dissimilar from like your Premier League in soccer or football, your NFL, your NBA in a sense, except the fact that because there's no single regulated body for all games, because games are completely different in context, you can't set up the same type of ecosystem that you would with a more controlled like athletic body or athletic competition or game. So in that context, when we're trying to define how to build liquidity, how to build value accrual, how to create an ecosystem in which people are actively buying into something and seeing those returns, the time horizon for a return is much different, but also the scope and the scale of what it takes to actually run an esports agency is much more time and cost intensive than other DAOs that might just be dealing with art, for instance, or might just be dealing with design, or might even be dealing with the development of a tool. And so it's all about, for us, like we've been trying to figure out like the educational barriers to this too, which also kind of play a role into how people can be actively participating in governance and whatever. But yeah, so we had this initial token, and then once we moved into a more like nounish model through Nouns Builder, which is quite recent, this is like Christmas of last year, we have a much more transparent and open form of governance and proposal making that I'm working with a couple of partners to move a lot of the old incumbent information and a lot of the incumbent token holders into this newer ecosystem so that everyone's on the same page and it's a lot easier to kind of deal with.
Just because I am not from the gaming background, I would love to know like how many games are there in the ecosystem and like what kind of games, and do I imagine that like I can swap NFTs? Elaborate a bit on the esports world a bit for people who don't really are into it.
Absolutely, sure. So for us, if you think about any other esports entity like your FaZe Clan, your 100 Thieves, your Cloud9, Fnatic, Optic, whomever, they do two specific things. The first thing they do is they raise a large sum of money to hire competitive talent that will compete in a game like Call of Duty, Dota 2, League of Legends, Fortnite, any popular game that has a multiplayer component but can be quite competitive. Developers and publishers of those games will create events and tournament programming so that teams and organizations and players can compete, so that they could, basically say that they're the best at this game. At the end of the day, esports, just like traditional sports, is all about bragging rights. If you can say that you're the best at what you do in a particular sport, that's hype. That's like superstardom. That creates content, that creates culture, that creates movement, right? So what they do is they want to find the best talent that they can source to compete in these games. And then secondarily, they combine that and add a cultural component by investing into merchandise, investing into product, and mainly investing into content creators. So these would be your folks that will create videos around gaming or adjacent to gaming spaces on social media like TikTok, YouTube. They'll stream on Twitch, whatever, right? And because we're moving into a more creator economy ecosystem, or that's what we've been in for the past like 5 years, that's sort of like the dominant space in which sort of like esports culture kind of thrives in. So for us at Blackhand, when you are a participant in our DAO, by buying a membership, this is through our like daily auctions. What this allows you to do is to help us, we collectively raise treasury so that we can empower players. For example, we have an Apex Legends team that's currently about to compete at the pro level in February. And then we also have this ability to then finance other initiatives that will help make Blackhand culturally relevant within esports, within culture, within fashion, within music, so on and so forth. Anything that can kind of create this blend between gaming, X, insert category, that's where we want to be. Like you said before when you made our intro, like we're trying to build an ecosystem for emerging new esports organizations. Blackhand serves to be the blueprint for what the new form of esport organization talent, sourcing, competitive drive, and even how you operate within this kind of like ecosystem. That's what we're designing right now. It's sort of like the building blocks for how new players can get in the game. Because right now, esports is going through a very, very like steep market correction. Player salaries are incredibly inflated. The tournament organizers are very terrible when it comes to making sure players get compensated, making sure orgs get compensated. There's a huge barrier and a lack of transparency between teams and players based upon what teams can afford versus what players believe their value is. There's a whole lot of different market making situations that we can arbitrage and use to our advantage to create something much more equitable and fair for everyone involved. So that's kind of our goal in a nutshell, and why we believe that Blackhand is going to be incredibly important in the next 10 years as it relates to esports.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining this. I think this will be really valuable for the community to understand. So all these people who are on Twitch and they're playing games, you guys are providing the layer for them to kind of build their brand and have their assets kind of in place. That's how I understood it now. And I'm wondering,
Absolutely.
I don't know what your gaming experience is, but what does the community and the cultural aspect of online communities and DAOs mean to you? How do you even build a strong foundation for a community in your perspective?
I think gamers and folks that were especially a part of early internet know so much about the value of connection. Some of my really good friends that I've known and never met, I've played online with for 15 years, right? I've never physically met this person yet, but we know each other's names. I know their kids. We know everything about each other. And that's a super special thing that, while things might seem incredibly difficult to befriend people in real life, I think there's challenges both in online and offline when it comes to that. But there's something about this aspect of being anonymous in how you look, but completely doxed in everything else about yourself from an online perspective when you're connecting with somebody else. And I think there are so many really awesome, heartwarming stories of gamers who have had romantic relationships, have had incredible friendships. There was a story one time, I think it's on Reddit, where a father who lost their son was connected with a kid they played the same games together. And but that kid lost his dad, and they became it was a surrogate family in a sense. These are the type of situations that could that happen. So I think that connection with online communities is incredibly important. And I think that's why, to me, this aspect of building something like this feels very close to home, because I've done it already. A lot of us, especially anyone who's been a part of, whether it's MySpace or Facebook days, even early Facebook days, knows that we've built friendships purely through an online lens at some point in our lives now. And that's an incredible thing to think about. So it's not too far-fetched of an idea for an online community to come together and rally around a cause, because at some point we've all known what it's like to kind of find a like-mindedness with a certain group of people. And so our goal is to be able to really kind of help facilitate that in a new way and say, hey, instead of it just being this community where you are enriching each other, let's find other ways to empower and give agency to all of you as well. And I think DAOs are very vital, and the agency delivery system in which folks can feel like they have this jurisdiction to do something that is greater than themselves and feel proud and happy that they're actually a part of that movement. To me, I think that when we're able to fully turn that on with everyone or most people within any particular DAO situation, I think we'll start to see even more loads of magic happen with a lot of these communities. And I think for us too, that's, we're trying to build the steps to kind of help that along. And I think we're definitely on the right path.
I love what you said. And it's you can support your friends, with even establishing their economic system and helping them achieve their dreams. I remember when Twitch came around and the first players were blowing up with making YouTube videos, it was wow, that's their they made that their career. And during the pandemic, that a lot of these people came up, and it's we find these loopholes online that we couldn't find in real life. We find these friendships,
right?
We might have an interest that nobody had, or we might have a cause that we want to support, but we didn't really find anyone to connect. And now with Web3, DAOs, and all these tools, we finally find people who are on the same page, who want to build the same things. And I think that's really cool that you shared that from your perspective. So I want to know, what is some of the advice you would give as a founder when building in Web3? Like, what are some of the things that you learned, and maybe also give some advice to like the people who want to be participating in like esports?
Sure. So as a founder, the goal is to not be the smartest person in the room. You want to learn from everybody. I think the core principle is know that you can learn from everybody. It may not necessarily be exactly what you wanted to learn, but what you have to realize is you can learn from people in multiple ways. You can learn more about them, what drives them, what their motivations are, what their thought process is, right? Which I think is a core component in understanding and having empathy for customers, empathy for fans, empathy for participants, empathy for your community, right? I think you can also learn, obviously, like technical things, like terms, like process, right? How to do something, or just even kind of like a way to challenge your own assumptions, your own thoughts, your biases, things of that nature, right? Like the idea is to always deconstruct yourself and understand that you can use these new learnings as building blocks to build a better foundation for you as a person, so that you can become a better leader, a better facilitator for your community, for your team, right? If you're the smartest person in the room, then you remove the opportunities for growth, because it ends up just becoming your way or no way. And then that's not a way to be a founder or to facilitate something. It's good to have an idea. It's good to have conviction. It's good to be dogmatic about your particular goals or your thoughts, but you have to always be open. I would say the other thing too is like, it's hard work. This is a challenge. Don't romanticize the idea of being a founder if you're not willing to do the work, if you're not willing to compromise, to sacrifice, within reason, obviously. I don't think anyone should sacrifice everything that they know and love in the pursuit of something like this, unless that's what you are really comfortable with doing. But I would never put that on somebody, right? So don't romanticize it, but don't feel like you can't live a life in the pursuance of something greater than yourself. You definitely can do both. It's a lot of hard work, but it takes a lot of active communication with everyone that you're with in order for everyone to know where you are, so that they can help round out and fill in the gaps, because you can't do everything. That's the third thing. You're not an octopus. You don't have multiple arms, legs, or brain, okay? So you can only do a certain amount of stuff. My mom and my dad always used to tell me, you can do everything you want, just not at the same time. I keep that in mind always, right? Like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's like, okay, well, I have to prioritize. I have to put the list and say, okay, these things are not completely relevant right now. I have to table them. Or if they are relevant, well, then these other things aren't relevant, right? I would say that as a founder. If you want to get into esports, there are so many different ways to do this. You don't have to just be a gamer. There are people who work in esports who are not really interested in games at all. I don't think that has to be your guiding principle to be in this industry. I think with any industry, right? Like, I didn't know anything about healthcare, but I worked in healthcare for 2.5 years as a designer. But in the learning of that, in the process of learning about the ecosystem, I got a better appreciation, and it enabled me to do my job differently, because I had a completely different point of view than everyone else. And I think embrace the difference. If you're not necessarily a gamer, but you want to be in esports, I think that's possible. You don't have to game to be there. You can be a content creator. You can be a designer. You can be a manager. You can run operations. There's so many aspects about business that's fundamental to any industry that is, esports also needs those things too. I would say also, if you are into gaming and you do want to be a competitor, like if you want to be a pro, the goal is you have to put in the practice, you got to put in the time, and you have to think about it like an athlete. You cannot think about it like a casual gamer who will, okay, I'm going to wake up and then just play 10 hours. You have to be regimented. There has to be a system so that you can chart your growth. If you think that by just playing the same game over and over with no rest, no time to think about your gameplay, no time to analyze what you're doing, then you're not going to get in the position in which you become a pro. The other thing is, esports is a very small industry, and the fact that everyone practically knows everybody. So you have to get comfortable with the idea of networking. You might be introverted. You may even be extroverted. Maybe it works within a particular environment that you are not, and maybe this environment's not necessarily that comfortable for you. That's all right. The work will speak very loud, but at some point, you do have to realize that building relationships with people are just as important. So if you want to get into it and you need a resource, you can always reach out to me. You can always reach out to our team. We're very into sharing the wealth. And if you want to get access to particular players, we've got a load of players. We know a bunch of other players, so we can help make intros. But ultimately, we can show you where the door is. But like anything, you got to be the person to walk through it because that's your life. We can't live it for you. So if that's something that you want, you got to build that confidence and tell yourself that you are worthy, that you are special, that you are able to make this thing happen, and it's going to work out for you. I have to tell myself that every day. I have to tell my team that. We got to tell ourselves that we are deserving of where we are and that we are deserving of doing the things that we say that we want to do for people. You cannot live a life without affirming to yourself that you're worthy of the life you have, right? Gratefulness is the closest thing that we have, I think, to nirvana. So we should practice that daily. I'll leave you with that.
Praise, like this was on point. I really like the fact that you shared it's not as easy to be a founder as it might seem. It's not as pretty. Like the behind the scenes of having a business and running a business is different than what you see online most of the time. And yeah, like you also said, it's really easy right now with Web3 to join any kind of community and build your own niche. Like if you're a designer, you can get into gaming. Even if like there's so much happening with, for example, fashion and gaming, like you would never put these together, right? But now that we have
absolutely
all happening, you're like, damn, like this is really like an opportunity for both industries. And I think businesses are changing. They're not like this one stiff kind of entity, right? They have multiple components and different sides of themselves, and that's a challenge in itself, but it presents a growth opportunity for people who want to get their skills into any business kind of. So don't be afraid to reach out to people, and yeah, join the Blackhand community if you're interested into esports. Quickly, where can we find you and the community on Twitter and everywhere else? Would love to know.
So if you want to look up Blackhand, you can look it up, blackhand.com. We spell it differently. We use Roman V's. So it's BLVKHVND.com. You can also use the same thing, .WTF, that gets access to our daily auctions, our proposals, our governance model, our treasury, anything that you want to learn more about kind of like that aspect, the Web3 aspect, you can go there. You can find us, BLVKHVND on Twitter. You can find me at SIRSU on Twitter. And you can also find me and the team on Discord. And do that, we use this really nifty service called Guild. So you can do guild.xyz/blackhand, and you'll be able to join our Telegram and our Discord account.
Amazing. Thank you so much, SIRSU, for being part of today's episode and teach us more about esports and where we can find all these resources. And we can't wait to see where you're going to go with Blackhand in the next year. And thank you so much for everyone who tuned in, and we see you guys in the next episode.